Keep that round of applause going for Michael Marshall. Michael, get up here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eli. So it is my pleasure to do the Ockham Awards tonight as editor of The Skeptic magazine. So since 1987, The Skeptic has been publishing expert analysis of pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, and claims of the paranormal. And the last time that the Ockhams were on this stage in 2018 when, yes, I won it, thank you for reminding people, Eli, I was not the one handing it out, because that would have been wrong. It was the former editor, Deborah Hyde, who is in the audience here. Yeah, Deborah, fantastic. Since then, I've taken over the stewardship of this long-running magazine, along with our deputy editor, Alice Howarth, who's also in the room here. Fantastic, Dr. Alice. And all the team from the Merseyside Skeptic Society who are behind the magazine at the moment. And we've been publishing online pieces from across the skeptic community pretty much a couple of times a week, really, ever since we relaunched in 2020. I think there's even quite a few of our writers for the magazine in the room tonight. And I hope there's even more future writers for the magazine in the room tonight, because we're always interested in ideas. This is a magazine from the community, and we really do believe that the people of this community have a lot of interesting stuff to tell us. So by all means, my inbox is open, always open for interesting, fresh perspectives, new voices, stuff like that. So yeah, this is the first time I've had the pleasure of handing out the Ockhams in person, because over the last 2 years, we've done the Ockham Awards, but it's been entirely remote. I've been in my bedroom, which is substantially smaller than this, and with substantially fewer people than this. But otherwise, it's very much the same vibe, very, very similar. I love red wine flowing, that kind of thing. The Ockhams exist to recognize the very best in skeptical activism, the stuff that we care about, who's doing it well, who's making a difference in the world. You know, people are working hard to make a positive difference to the world around us, to encourage critical thinking, challenge pseudoscience, and to try and make it a bit harder for those misleading claims that are out there to put vulnerable people in harm's way, to watch the backs of society. This is what these awards are for. And last year's winner, you may remember, went to Dr. Elizabeth Bick, the microbiologist and research fraud detective whose work in looking through scientific literature to find places where people have just straight out lied in their literature about these different drug discoveries and various of the treatment discoveries. That work has been fantastic in not only stopping misinformation from spreading, but it also demonstrates that skepticism isn't just picking on alternative medicine and the low-hanging fruit. If you're doing bullshit, we will find you, essentially is what this is about, you know. It's about anywhere that people are misleading people. That's the really important thing. Yeah. So that is the Ockham Award, which I'll be very gentle picking up, because it doesn't half hold fingerprints, this glass award. If anybody does get killed by an Ockham, I am going to prison 100% for the amount of my fingerprints that are all over this. So that's one of the awards there, but we also give out another award, this award here. They're very much the opposite of the Ockham Award, the Rusty Razor Award. Which goes to the person, the group, or the organization who've been persistent and prolific or influential promoters of pseudoscience within the last 12 months. It recognizes people who push misinformation, who contribute to the collective confusion in society, and who muddy the water with false claims and dodgy conclusions. Last year's winner, you may remember, was Dr. Mike Yeadon, who used to work for Pfizer, and then when the pandemic hit, he went completely off the rails and started spewing anti-vaccine bullshit with all of the legitimacy and credibility of being able to say, I used to work for these guys and I know. And those claims spread worldwide. I think in one poll, they even looked and found that 20% of Americans had heard of one of his claims about the idea that the COVID vaccine would cause infertility. It wasn't true. He just made it up whole cloth and said, this isn't based on science at all. It was basically an I reckon. And we gave him the Rusty Razor Award as a result. So as with those winners last year and with the winners of tonight's award, these are all chosen by the editorial board of The Skeptic from nominations made by you guys in the skeptical community. We ask you, who do you think deserves recognition, positive or negative? Who's out there that we should be shining a light on? And that's who we chose these winners from tonight. And we've had some really, really excellent and very worthwhile winners in both categories, and very worthwhile nominations too. So in terms of the Ockham Award, there was a number of nominations for the incredibly courageous and brave families of the Sandy Hook victims, who stood up to Alex Jones after the worst possible imaginable tragedy. And they got a semblance of justice, a meager amount of what they've lost, but some way of saying you can't just lie about our dead kids like that. So they were very worthwhile. There were nominations for excellent podcasts like Sawbones and The Body of Evidence. I think Jonathan Jarry's in tonight. There was nominations for Body of Evidence. Fantastic show. There was nominations for the nutrition pseudoscience debunker, Dr. Joshua Woolrich, who's done some fantastic work over the last 12 years. And for skeptics who focus on teaching critical thinking to kids, people like Dr. Ronald Crouch, a.k.a. Dr. Dad, and the Hocus Pocus comics, which I know that Richard Wiseman is part of, trying to teach kids critical thinking, incredibly important thing. And then there was a really, really strong case for the winners who very, very nearly won this, which were going to be the data detectives, the team who scour research papers looking to identify data fraud, which includes Nick Brown, Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz, James Heathers, Kyle Sheldrick, and Jack Lawrence, who I believe is also in tonight. If you're there, Jack, you very nearly, fantastic work, utterly superb work. Credit to skepticism. But in the end, we considered just how much reach that our final winner had, and just how vital their work has been in documenting and debunking some of the absolutely most harmful viral claims, not just of the last year, but of the last number of years, really. And that's why we've decided that the 2022 recipient of the Ockham Award for Outstanding Skeptical Work had to be the BBC's Disinformation Unit. Okay? Now, it's actually quite hard to put a single name on the winner of this award, because the BBC's Disinformation Unit is very prolific across its output. It includes the teams behind BBC Trending Podcast, behind BBC Monitoring, BBC Reality Check. It's people like Mariana Spring, Mike Wendling, Rachel Schreier, who was here earlier today, Marco Silva, and many, many more. And they've done a fantastic job pushing back against COVID pseudoscience, climate change pseudoscience, and all sorts of other stuff, extreme far-right stuff, all sorts of stuff. Their work's been a shining example of diligent, tenacious, and deeply skeptical reporting, getting to the very bottom of viral health claims, misuse statistics, misleading imagery, manipulated videos, and dangerous conspiracism. They've documented how the anti-vaccine movement has become more and more extreme, how Russian propaganda regarding the invasion of Ukraine has spread through conspiracist channels in this country and persuaded people that Russia are right about what they're doing there in this horrible war. They've also spoken directly to the people who believe these kind of ideas and try to humanize them and understand them, which is incredibly important, to show firsthand how people can be swayed by rhetoric and fear and the real human cost of misinformation. And it really does embody the ethos of the skeptic, this reason with compassion. We think they do it fantastically well. So that in mind, we're very proud to give this award for skeptical activism to the BBC's Disinformation Unit. Unfortunately, the team can't be with us this evening, not even Rachel. She had to head off, unfortunately. But Rachel did leave us this video to accept the reward, which we'd like to show you now.
Hi QED conference, sorry I couldn't be there for the ceremony in person. I just want to thank the Skeptic very much for this award on behalf of the BBC's Disinformation Unit. Tracking and debunking misinformation can be quite relentless and emotionally draining work. It takes a team of people with lots of different skills, from social media analysis and open source intelligence to fact-checking, sensitive interviewing, and it doesn't always make you popular, especially in certain corners of the internet. So we're really honoured to be recognised as a team for this work, and thanks again.
I hope you agree, a very worthwhile winner. And that leads us very neatly onto tonight's other award, the Rusty Razor here for the promotion of pseudoscience. And again, we asked you to think about what pseudoscience was out there being promoted, how many people it was reaching, what potential for harm was involved in it. And again, you didn't disappoint. It's fair to say we've got some very worthwhile pantomime villains to boo and hiss at this year. And again, inevitably and quite rightly, Alex Jones was nominated, very deserving for this. We thought about giving it to him, but after this ruling that came out recently where he owes £965 million, we realized we're not that sure he could afford to pick up the international shipping cost of us sending it to him. So we didn't want to pile the misery on and have the guy try and find another like $30 or something like that. There were lots of nominations related to COVID misinformation. People like Joe Rogan, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Dr. Peter McCulloch. We even had a nomination for the British government. So that nomination was partly for their mishandling of COVID, and partly because, Everything else, I mean, look around. So we did think of giving them that award, but that would involve us knowing who's in the British government at any given point. That's very much a shifting target, you know? It's like, what, it's 10 to 10 now. Anybody could be prime minister by this point. Could be anything. But while the British government's mishandling of COVID very clearly helped spread misinformation, that was kind of the crises of 2020 and 2021, and in their main, it's still going on now. We know full well COVID isn't over. But this year, we also saw the effects of another undeniable crisis that's affecting not just us, but people all around the world. Because this summer in the UK, we saw the highest temperatures ever recorded. We saw record heat waves, wildfires, we saw extended droughts, and we saw a glimpse of what we can expect the climate of this country to be like if we don't deal with the crisis that's on our doorstep. You know, other parts of the world weren't even as lucky to get away as lightly as we did. You know, there's devastating floods in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Australia, I know, is suffering a huge flood right now too. Record hurricanes in Florida, much, much more besides. And yet, even in the face of such clear evidence that climate change isn't hypothetical and it's not going to affect us in some far-flung year in the future, but it's right here and right now, we still see some people denying reality. And that denial of reality is never more important than when its voices echo around the corridors of power. And that's why this year's winner of the Rusty Razor Award is someone you may never have heard of, and that's why we think they deserve it. It goes to the Rusty Razor Award for pseudoscience goes to the Global Warming Policy Foundation, otherwise known as Net Zero Watch. Okay? This is the reason. Bear with me, trust me. So the Global Warming Policy Foundation is a name not many people will know. But in many ways, that makes them stand out. They are a registered charity here in the UK whose stated aims are to challenge extremely damaging and harmful policies proposed by governments to mitigate climate change. They were set up in 2009, and since then they've churned out a series of reports that downplay, doubt, or outright deny the risks of climate change. And the current chairman of the GWPF is a guy called Neil Record, who, in no coincidence at all, is the chairman of the Institute for Economic Affairs, based at 55 Tufton Street. That's the opaquely funded libertarian think tank whose economic ideas fall outside the scope of this award and arguably outside the scope of reality, given what they've done to the budget of late. As well as sharing a chairman with the GWPF, the IEA shares an office at 55 Tufton Street, and they share a set of policy objectives and an agenda too. And we know that they've admitted they receive substantial fundings from groups like the Koch brothers and from fossil fuel companies like BP in order to lobby ministers to weaken climate change legislation. That's what they've admitted to on camera. They promise that none of that funding that they get from BP goes to their climate change denial charity, but their accounts are opaque and we just have to take their word for it. And I don't think we should be taking their word for it. We do know that Neil Record himself, while head of the IEA and the Global Warming Policy Foundation, gave £400,000 to the government, including £18,000 to Matt Hancock when Matt Hancock was the climate change minister. It's a climate change denial charity giving money to the climate change minister. That is buying influence. The GWPF is nothing if not well represented in this government. The original chair was the well-known climate change denier who sits in the House of Lords, Nigel Lawson, a guy who's banned from the BBC because of his climate change denial. He's still on the board of trustees now. Other former trustees include Lord Joel Barnett, Lord Bernard Donoghue, Lord Robert Fellows, Lord Peter Lilly, Lord Charles Moore, the owner of the Daily Telegraph, in fact, Baroness Emma Nicholson, Lord Andrew Turnbull, Reverend Peter Forster, who also just happens to be a member of the House of Lords, but also Stephen Baker, the current Secretary for Northern Ireland, is on the board of trustees of this climate change denial organisation. Also on the board is Graham Stringer MP, who sits on the Science and Technology Select Committee in government, the very body that scrutinises our laws in terms of science and technology. And as climate change doubt has dwindled in the public, as more and more people recognise the reality, the GWPF have just switched their focus. In October 2021, they rebranded as Net Zero Watch. Their aim was to try and undermine the push for getting carbon emissions down to zero. And they're doing it talking directly to ministers in this government who receive funds from them. Around the same time, Steve Baker and a number of GWPF-related MPs and lords founded a group called Net Zero Scrutiny Group, which is in Parliament, which uses GWPF misinformation to scrutinise the laws we use and the laws we apply to try and control climate change in this country and to push back against the efforts that we're making to stop the crisis. So for its prolific climate change denialism, its close ties to opacally funded think tanks with friends in the oil industry, and its revolving door relationship with the very people who create and scrutinize our climate policy, the Global Warming Policy Foundation is the winner of the 2022 Rusty Razor Award for Pseudoscience. I told you you'd agree with me, they deserve it. Unfortunately, nobody from the GWPF could be here this evening because they're all too busy loudly distancing themselves from the economic plan that they give Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. But we'll be sure to let them know that they're our #1 pseudoscientist of the year. And that concludes our Ockhams for this evening. And so with that, I'll hand you back over to your MC for the night, Eli Potts.